Customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DiJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you're a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution podcast with John DiJulius. This week, John talks with LaQuita Cleare, CEO of Cleare Communication Academy. She's a highly sought-after international speaker and storytelling expert who believes in the power of communication to create change. In this episode, you'll learn why storytelling is so critical to being a successful leader. What are the most uncommon mistakes leaders make when trying to incorporate storytelling? And when are details to a story important? And when are they unnecessary? Now here's your host, John DiJulius.
Hello, revolutionaries, and welcome to another episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. I am John DiJulius, Chief Revolution Officer, and I'm so excited about my guest today, our guest today, LaQuita Cleare, CEO of Cleare Communications Academy. Hello, LaQuita.
Hey, what's up? Thank you for having me on. Excited.
Yeah, it's been several years that I've been hearing about you from mutual clients, Rick Stern from Nitel and Mark Moses, and just tell me, how great you are. And then I got the pleasure of speaking at the same conference with you. Was it last fall?
Yeah, it was in October, which was nice for me to get a chance to meet you finally in person as well.
And you crushed it. So I'm so excited because I think what you do is so vital in the world today. I think the pandemic, one of the silver linings is making leaders realize how important tying an employee's job to the overall purpose. And to me, there's only one way to do that, through storytelling. So those are some things. But before we get in, can you give us a little bit of your backstory?
My backstory is quite interesting because I actually studied theater in college. So I'm a theater and psychology student. I grew up in Chicago and I moved to LA because I was sort of taken in by the sizzle, as many people are, of Hollywood. So I moved to LA to explore stories in Hollywood. What
was your intention? When you moved to LA, did you want to get in the business?
I did. And I did get in the business. I was like, I'm going to go to Hollywood. I'm going to get into the business. I kind of wanted to explore all parts of the business. So kind of in front of the camera, behind the camera. So I acted, I produced, I wrote, all of those things, because I was like, where can I learn about stories? So that is why I moved to LA and moved to Hollywood, and I'm still here. I kind of never left. The weather kept me here.
Okay. And then you became kind of this storytelling guru. And mostly is your clientele like CEO and senior level people that are trying to get better at clarifying their vision, direction? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we have a lot of CEO clients, of course, that are, YPOers, things like that. But they are people who are either trying to figure out how to lead using stories. So sometimes how they can inspire people, but it's not just CEOs. We work with sales teams. We've actually done recruiting teams who are trying to figure out how to position the company in a better way by using a story kind of as a differentiator. So it's nice to see kind of in the beginning of my career, it was mostly just CEOs and presidents. And then they started saying, hey, we better bring our teams along as well.
Yeah. I selfishly, when I'm speaking at a conference, I love following a CEO or a senior executive, because normally they're not obviously professional. If they haven't been well coached,
totally,
their slide deck is just paragraphs of words. And I'm saying it kind of tongue in cheek that they're probably not going to crush it. And then it just makes the professional speaker stand out so much more. And yeah, it's painful if they're not coached properly to get their message. And the visual of the slides are just really painful to watch.
Yeah, especially there in finance, I've noticed that there'll be like 50 slides of numbers. And I'm like, guys, we have to do something else. It can't just be numbers. We have to figure out how to humanize this in some way.
So tell me if you think this is right, because this is what I always say to people. Like if I'm going to speak and, I'm getting to know them, I start seeing the free stuff. I try to give them, and maybe I'm wrong. But what I see corporate people do wrong is they'll say, all right, here's the agenda. And they'll, and they'll read it. 8 a.m. We're going to have, continental breakfast in the night. And so I always say, listen, the way I look at things is I look at like the Oscars, and usually the MC doesn't come out and give you a rundown of what's going to happen and when, right? It just happens.
Yeah.
And so I try to tell them that, don't tell us what we're going to be doing and let's do it. And then tell us, for that, maybe you supply it in the handout. So if I need to know when I need to check with the office or smoke or whatever, I got it for reference, but I don't need to be told what's in front of me. Is that good advice?
That's like 150% correct.
Okay.
I say, even if you are going to at some point give them the agenda, it doesn't have to be the first thing you do. It's like so monotonous. The same thing also, I tell people, you don't have to stand up there and say, hi, my name is LaQuita, and today I'm going to be talking to you about, this is like the conference intro that I hear continuously.
Yeah.
Throw us into the moment. It's like a movie. They don't start the movie and tell you what the movie's going to be about.
Right.
They throw you into the scene in some way, so you get to be a part of it. And that's what I think is nice about kind of these presentations. But I don't think corporate has quite figured that out yet. It's more like giving people information.
Yeah. And the best advice I ever got was I spoke at a conference, and there was a professional speaker in the audience. And so after I said, how'd I do? And he said, good, great. I said, no, really. And luckily, he said, really? And I'm like, then I got a little nervous. But all he really said was, he goes, John, you have a great opening story. Eliminate when you come out. Thank you for being here. It's such a pleasure. Like, you're really not flattering anyone. No one's like, oh, wow, he's really honored to be speaking to me. And he said, like you said, come out mid-story. It was February 1998. And people are like, it was the best advice, because I was a little nervous when I was starting off. Thank you, LaQuita, for introducing me. And thank you for, the academy and all that silly stuff, right?
That's so funny. It makes me think of, if you've ever been in the seats where there's like 50 speakers and you've gotten 50 good mornings.
Right.
Like the 50th, you're like, just start. I've had like 9 other good mornings. So that's what I say too. But I find that until people become more comfortable, especially I think in a corporate world, we're more used to the agenda. We think it has to be a certain way. And I think that's what I love about working in corporate America and in the corporate world is I get a chance to kind of add that Hollywood spin on things.
Yeah. And so give us an example of that.
Yeah. So one example, so I recently had clients that were presenting, for example, at the JP Morgan conference and other big places like that. And usually you want to just go out there and you have to deliver the numbers, but sometimes having a brand story or just kind of giving us that moment to connect with you as a human about maybe how you started your business or the why behind the numbers. So that's one of the things that we were able to do with a recent opening hook is just get into the story behind the company. And I think that we all want to connect and we all want to feel that people are human. So that was a nice way to do that before, of course, later came all of the numbers. So that's kind of one way that we do things. I've had also clients who, you think of a big meeting or a town hall and you think about how can I use a story. Sometimes it's even a powerful customer story that helps people remember the entire team while they're there. I mean, we have the monotony of the meetings. We have the monotony of telling people that about the numbers or the KPIs, but actually telling them a powerful story about the people they are helping sometimes can just get that motivation up in the office. So that's another way. Like these are everyday ways that you can use stories and connect in presentations.
So where can people, I'm assuming we're talking about non-professional speakers, right? We're talking about people that have day jobs, but need to articulate and inspire and rally groups of employees, right? Whether they're coaches, leaders, right? It's all the same. If I work at a company and we're launching something next week. Where do I find stories? And maybe I've only been there. Now, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess I could have my own, right? But maybe I just started at this company and I'm a leader. And whether I use my own or I have to go interview a bunch of people, I feel like there should be a database of company stories, right? Above and beyond that we've done for the customer. Rags to riches of, LaQuita was hired, only 10 years ago at sweeping floors, and today she's a partner of the business, right? Like, I feel like, you need to have a database of these. What should companies do?
I do think there should be a database of stories. Not that people are going to use them or tell them in the same way, but I do think people should be armed, for example, with what are the value stories around the products and services? So everybody's used to listing off the features and things like that, but having the value stories about maybe a customer or how your product is really changing lives. I think that is one kind of category of a story. Another one is I do think it's really important to make sure that the employees understand the brand story, the story behind the brand. I think that is a game changer, not only just for employee morale in working somewhere, but also to be able to use with customers as well. So I think a little bit of that brand story is nice. And then, of course, I think there are also thematic stories depending on, which industry you are in. There might be, stories about innovation or about things that you've done as a company in innovation. And then you can also pull in your own stories, like what was the biggest moment for you in this company? Or maybe, like you said, the person's new and it's a past company. But I think sometimes those personal stories can combine really well with even the brand story. Combine your personal story with why you connected to that brand, because something in your background made you feel like, wow, I really connect with the brand and the values of this company that I'm at now, which may be a new company.
Do you think like every story should have a villain, victim, and hero in it?
Yeah, I do. I sort of think of it a little bit different. I think of it kind of like every story should take you on a journey, and there should be a change and there should be a conflict. So rather than people sort of thinking, okay, well, who's the villain? They don't always know that, but they always know that there's a conflict. There's something that I don't know. There's something that went wrong. There's an internal conflict. There's an external conflict. So I think if we think of it as there's a character, of course, and then there's some change that character goes through. If that character is you, what did you learn? How are you different from the beginning of the story until the end? So I think that's kind of the way to think about it. A character, a conflict, and some sort of change that happens.
And that's what I've always tried to do. Like in my first business, salons, when I speak to new employees, I try to tell them, here's what the industry was like 30 years ago. Hairdressers, weren't thought of as professional. They weren't paid well. No one took care of the customer, blah, 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 blah. And, we came out and opened it. We wanted, to write that. We wanted it to be a real career. We wanted customers. So I always, was trying to, and then you got to talk about what it's like today, what right we're trying to, or what wrong we're trying to make right.
That's exactly the structure. And then what's interesting, if I also understand from you, for example, like, how do you feel? What is the personal feeling that you had from then until now, or how maybe you've changed or adapted as well? So I think that's something interesting too. When I think about stories, though, I think during the beginning of the pandemic, I went and decided to sign up for a new bank account in addition to my current one. And I had been with my current bank for like 15 years. I went into this new bank, and this banker was amazing. Like, she was telling me stories. She was telling me even personal stories about her and her sister in Rome, connecting with me around my trips to Italy. Do you know I took all of my money out of the 15-year relationship that I had after one day of meeting this banker? I took nearly every cent that I had after 15 years. And it was just, for me, it was the power of that connection that you make.
You think she was just natural? What do you think
I think she had the ability to understand how to make a connection, and how a connection is made because you also share a lot. It's not just because you're asking me questions. So from the moment that I kind of walked in there, even before she said anything about products and services, she was connecting with me. It did just so happen to be that I was telling her I was going to Italy to do a gig. And she was like, oh, my sister and I had a bonding trip in Italy. And so she kind of shared that with me. But I think some of it was natural, absolutely. But I think she was really listening to me as a potential customer. She was listening. So she was kind of picking up on those cues of things that I was saying. And she was, 1 minute was a personal story. The next minute, she was telling me the value of the products. Oh, since you're traveling, let me tell you this. And so a lot of times I feel like people are not necessarily listening. That was the first time I experienced that in all of my banking years.
That's cool.
Becoming the brand customers can't live without is a team effort. Want to get everyone on board and bought into becoming a world-class brand? Consider bringing John in live or virtually for a keynote or workshop. Email Claudia at thedijuliusgroup.com for more information.
And so if I'm a leader listening and I know, I need to get better at storytelling to keep people engaged, to rally them around instead of just, going out there and say, we need to grow 10%, right? What would you say some common mistakes leaders do wrong when they try to storytell?
Oh, okay. One of my big pet peeves, I tell my clients, don't try to intellectualize your story. And what that means is so many times leaders are telling stories and it's just they're listing a timeline of events. It's not a story if there's no emotion anywhere in it. So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is that they sort of give you the facts. Oh, then I went here, then I went to school there, then I started my business, and they've taken all of the emotion out of it. So I'm not invested in any way. So that's a big mistake I think people make. The other, I think, is that people are not necessarily finding enough moments to tell stories. I feel like in the business world, we think that stories have to be these big moments, and they don't. It can be a very small moment just to kick off your meeting. So that's the second mistake. But don't make a story a timeline of events. It has to have some sort of emotion.
Yeah. You know what? Who I've learned so much from storytelling is comedians.
Completely.
I mean, you never see a comedian use PowerPoint, right? But man, you're there. I'm at the bar and I could see the guy with the tattoos and this, and I'm fearing that you're going to get and they're so good. But another thing that I know you teach is you think they're going down this thing and you're into, and then all of a sudden it was a holy crap moment. That's not where they were going with that story, which, then keeps you, you don't know where they're going next.
Yeah, those are fun. One thing I thought about too, so the comedians is absolutely right. I like also the delivery. You touched on the point. What makes that work is also the way their delivery comes to life. But I like kind of this idea of we call it in media res. So it's like,
wait, what do you call it?
In media res. So it's like in the middle of things.
Okay.
So I love when you have this story and it's like, and I'm sitting there and everybody was looking at me and my shoes were gone. And I don't know, a gun was pointed at the right side of me. You're like, what in the heck is going on? So it's like you see in the movies, when you see sort of like the end or you're in the middle of something and then you lean in and you're trying to figure out. And so the audience is watching it kind of unfold. So I do think that's a fun way to kind of tell a story, to kind of throw people into things like that. And then sometimes there's a twist, absolutely, where you're like, whoa, I thought it was going this way and it's not.
Yeah. And you're younger than I am, but I know you've been speaking long enough. People who are speaking today have such advantage. I mean, I started my speaking career pre-internet. So I might see 2, 3, 6 speakers a year at events I was speaking at, which didn't give. Now, I mean, you could watch 117 on YouTube or TED Talks. And, I tell people all the time, don't look at the topic, but they're speaking at, because you might be like, that's the way why did they pause? How they open. Like the topic is irrelevant. It's, if they're a masterful storyteller or presenter.
Yeah, there's a couple that I watched. There's one TED Talk that I fell in love with. I would have never clicked on the topic, but the way he's talking about the washing machine. It's like, come on, I don't want to hear about it. But the way he talks about his grandmother watching it for the first time, and literally she sat down and she watched the entire washing cycle because she so like fascinated. But the way he throws you into the story as the opening is really masterful. So I definitely think it's interesting just to kind of to see and study speakers and to see it also leaders, because even if you look in the leadership community, a lot of leaders who are using stories and then some who are not. And you can see the difference of those who are out there sometimes telling stories, or you just feel like you really kind of know them and you feel connected to them.
Politicians, I mean, they're coaches, politicians, leaders, a lot of them are unbelievable. How important do you coach your CEOs and leaders to show vulnerability in their stories? I think that's an important trait, that they're human.
I think vulnerability is important. I think it has its place. So one of the first things that I'm doing when I'm working with a leader or a team is we have to understand the goal of the story. That is before anything. So if we understand, I always say it's strategic storytelling. If we understand the goal, for example, I'm going to be less vulnerable in front of investors than maybe I'm going to be in front of the new team that I'm onboarding, or in a different way. If I'm speaking to investors and I'm trying to get a bunch of money, I'm not going to go in there and tell, part of my story, how I really feel so insecure standing up here today. And I'm not really sure what's the next level of the company, but I wouldn't tell that specific story in that way. I wouldn't show that vulnerability. Whereas for a team, people want to feel like they can relate to you. They want to feel like, no, I'm not just the leader. It's somebody that, wow, that person was kind of like me. So I think vulnerability is essential, but it has its place. And it's not that I always tell people, just be so vulnerable. It really depends.
Right. It has to be authentic too, right?
Completely.
So I think of an example of, maybe a leader getting up with what's going on the past couple of years, saying that he or she has someone in their family suffering from depression, right? Now he is one of us, or she is one of us, because we all have someone in our family, or we are. So he's opened it up for it to be okay to discuss.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting when we think about how we connect as leaders, because those vulnerable moments can show up in a lot of different ways when you are storytelling. We even if we look at a big speech like when Steve Jobs spoke at Stanford, he was telling the story and he spoke about being adopted. And one of the first things he said was that it was the closest he had been to a college graduation. So what did that do? Suddenly he's in front of this big audience. They're like, wow, this guy is just normal. He's human.
Right.
It humanized him in a big way. So I do think showing some of that vulnerability in general in our presentations, the way we present ourselves and in stories is essential and authentic, but you find that how it works for you as you get more.
As you're speaking, I feel like self-deprecation maybe is a cousin of vulnerability, but if you could work that in, now you are a little bit more human, and you don't think you walk on water like we assume you do, right? I mean,
totally.
Yeah.
That's interesting. There's a funny clip of that was so endearing of Oprah. So of course people are like, most people cannot relate to Oprah.
No.
They're like, woman is, a billionaire. Like we can't relate. So she went to speak at Harvard. And before she started, she just was there and she started shouting. She was like, oh my goodness, I'm at Harvard. That was all she said. Everybody started laughing. It was like, oh, Oprah's excited to speak at Harvard? Like suddenly she was like, you could even relate to her. You're like, wow, I'd be excited to speak at Harvard. Oprah and I have something in common. She's excited to speak at Harvard too. So it's sometimes those small moments. And I think a lot of times as leaders, many leaders are afraid to show all sides because they feel like they always have to show this power that we don't get to see different sides of them. And it's hard to connect. So you feel that they're credible and you feel that, great, they can lead you or do something great with the team or the company, but you just don't connect with them on a human level.
Something I want to ask you that I struggle with teaching, like my consultants, giving advice, is to them, they think I'm contradicting myself because I'm like, you're giving me details that just don't matter, right? Like you're telling me that, you're at the bar and the waitress had a yellow sweater on, and unless there's something that's going to come back later about the yellow shirt, sweater, or the, whatever, why did you tell me about the yellow thing? And they're like, okay, but then they don't tell me enough details that would have set it up. And so going back to the bar, I flung my hands open and knocked the beer on the guy next to me. Well, the detail I'm not given that I should be is that he was a 6'8", Harley biker, tattooed up. That's some details that you want to know, because right now you're expecting, oh my God, I would not want to be John. He's about to get squashed like a bug. But I struggle with it, because they're like, John, you told me I'm using too many details, but then you're telling me I'm not. Which way do you want it? Is there an easy way to coach someone on what's the details you want to add and what aren't?
I think one way is to think about, are the details pushing the story forward? So are they details that you need to know in order for it to either push the story forward or to make sense? Or the next thing to think about is, maybe is a detail adding depth or emotion or some element that would make sense. If I'm telling you that I moved to Hollywood with only 2 suitcases in my hands and didn't know anybody and didn't have a job, those details are kind of important versus me just saying, you know what, I moved to Hollywood to be part of the industry. Yeah. So is it giving you some greater context?
Yeah.
Or is it pushing the story forward in some way? And if you didn't have the detail, maybe it wouldn't make sense. So that's kind of the 2 ways that you can think.
That's good. I like that. Well, good. So how can people work with you? I know you have a methodology, a CEO method. Is that what it's called? A signature and trademark method that helps thousands of people from different parts of the world build unbreakable connections with customers, clients, and employees. So I'm going to have your information, links to your websites. What else? Can we follow you on LinkedIn? You have a summit coming up a little less than a year from now. Talk about that. Storytelling Summit.
Yeah, this is going to be exciting. Something that I haven't seen out there and I've been wanting to see. It's a conference all about storytelling. It's called Rock My Story. And it is for you to come and understand how to tell better stories, whether that is your origin story, whether that's your brand story. So everything. So deep dive workshops and practice sessions. And it's at a famous location in LA. It's going to be at the Skirball Center. So we're excited.
That's awesome. All right, great. And we're going to have a link to that in the show notes. Any other resources my audience can learn from you or watch you or see what your menu of services you provide?
Yeah, so I would say you will link them to the website. I love when you connect with me on LinkedIn as well, because I'm always posting things on my LinkedIn, not only that I learned from traveling and doing this work, but I'm always posting tidbits. So follow me, you can get information there. I do also write articles in popular publications. I'm happy to link a couple storytelling articles. One I wrote for Entrepreneur. So I'll link a few of those as well.
Do you have a blog that people can follow?
Yeah, so we do have a blog as well with my company, Clear Communication Academy. We have a blog as well. And we're writing more and more things and posting some videos. So you'll be able to see some videos as well on our LinkedIn page and also my personal LinkedIn page.
Awesome. Well, it's such a pleasure to finally get you on here. Like I said, you have such a great reputation. So many of my CEOs that I've consulted work with you and just, have been telling me for years that you are the best at what you do. And I got to see that firsthand in Miami. So thank you for taking the time and joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me on. I know what you do and I love what you do. And I look forward to the next time that we chat.
All right. Well, thank you, Revolutionaries, for another episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. This is John DiJulius. We'll see you next week.
We love to read your reviews. Please be sure to share your comments and let us know what you're enjoying most on the podcast. And to hear more episodes, be sure to subscribe now on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening and being part of the Customer Service Revolution.